So we're going to continue with another example here. And in this example, I'm going to show you a function that has a different type of return value called a Boolean return. So we're going to write a function called even sum that will take two parameters, we'll call a and b, that returns true if the sum a plus b is even and false otherwise. Okay, so we want to pass it two numbers, a and b. We want our function to add up the numbers and then return true if that sum is even and false if it is odd. Okay, so we'll start by writing our function header, def even sum a comma b colon. And what are the steps our function will have to take? Well, first it will have to add up the two values and store that sum in a variable, which I'll call my sum. So my sum equals a plus b. Now I'm going to set up an if statement because I want to return true if the sum is even and false otherwise. So I'm going to need a conditional. So if my sum, now remember that the way we can check whether a number is even is by modding it by 2. And if the remainder when you divide by 2 is 0, then that means the number is even. So if my sum mod 2 equals 0, translates to my sum is even. So in that case, we are going to return true. And notice that true must be spelled with a capital T, and it should turn orange or some other color because that is a reserved word in Python. It is called a Boolean. True and false are Booleans. We could do this a couple of ways. We could do if my sum mod 2 is equal to 1, because any odd number modded by 2 would give you 1. So we could do that. But I am just going to throw that into my else to make it a little simpler. So if I was not even, we want to return false. Okay? So save it, run it. Again, nothing happens because we haven't called the function, but I've got no errors. So go ahead, type in the code into idle and make sure you get no errors. Great. So now let's go ahead and let's try to call our function. So something I want to show you is that you can put a function call right inside of a print statement. So we know that if we were to say call the function even sum and pass it two values like 5 and 6, if we were just to run this, we wouldn't see any output because we wouldn't have asked Python to print anything. However, even sum 5 comma 6 does return a value. It returns either true or false. So what we can do is we can put that whole function call inside of a print statement, and what will get printed is whatever gets returned, so either true or false. So here we go, and we see false, and that makes sense because when you add 6 and 5 you get 11, which is not even. So there's a couple of things that can go wrong or that students might try to do. One thing students might try to do is print out my sum. And let's see what happens when you do that. What you see is an error that says the name my sum is not defined. So the reason that is because my sum actually got defined inside of the function even sum, which means that it is local to that function and cannot be seen by the rest of the program. So the rest of the program has no knowledge of that variable. The only thing that the rest of the program can see is the return value true or false. So that's one mistake students will often make. So let's go back here. So why don't you go ahead and test out this print statement, make sure it works. And then here's a little challenge. you are going to ask the user to enter two numbers and then pass those numbers as parameters to even sum. Okay? So this is similar to what I showed you in the last video about combining user input with function calls. So go ahead and take a couple of minutes, pause the video, try to do that, and then when you restart the video, I'll show you how I did it. Great, so hopefully you've got something. So let's see, I'm gonna delete that. So the first thing I'm gonna do is ask the user to enter two numbers. I'm gonna use this using two separate input statements. The first number I'll store in a variable num1, and that's gonna be int input, please enter a number. And then I'll have num2 equals int input, please enter another number. And now I will have to call the even sum function, and as the parameters I will pass num1 and num2, which are what the numbers that the user gave me. And then just like before, I will stick that function call inside of a print statement so that either true or false gets printed out depending on what's returned. So if we test that out, I'm going to enter 789 and 12,655, and it turns out that the sum of those numbers is even. So go ahead and fix up your code if you need to. Make sure you understand it. Feel free to rewind the video, and I will see you in the next tutorial.